Welcome.
Good morning.
Welcome to Belgrade Online,
An online ministry of Belgrade Avenue United Methodist Church.
I was thinking this morning a little bit about when I started speaking back in high school, when I first joined that speech team. And of course I was scared of speaking, but I figured the only way to nip it in the butt would be to join the speech team. And thank you to Mrs. Comstock and Mrs. Holland for all the tutelage they gave and chances and all the gracious judges that had to listen to me speak and score it. And, with that note, thank you for all who have been with me this past 10, 15 years as I've kind of developed in my speaking here, doing this kind of stuff. Still get anxious, by the way, but better at suppressing it, So whoever wants to be next another time, feel free. I'm sure you'll do just as fine. So, Mrs. Holland and Mrs. Comstock were English teachers. So I'm going to take us back and give us a little English lesson, and more of a poetry lesson, which has to do with English class. But yeah. So often when we read the Bible, we kind of think of it as one book. And I don't know if you've ever thought of it more as an anthology of books of different collections of works, or if you tend to think of it as just one book. Anybody tend to think of it as just one book and it's all the same? Anybody think of it as a collection of different stories? I know it's very easy to think about it as one book. This says that, and it should say that, and all that different things. I've talked with people that very narrowly view it, and it says that, it must be that. Maybe it was written in different chapters, but yeah, we definitely want to think of it as a. So we often want to think about it as we want to think about it as an anthology of books, where it's very much a collection of different works, and with that collection, it has a large influence. It's not just Israel in that period. It had influence from, modern day, ancient Greece, which is modern day Greece. It had influence from Assyria and Babylon, which are modern day Iraq and Iran. It had influence from Egypt. It had influence from Asia Minor, which is modern day Turkey. And so even though a lot of it happens in what is modern day Israel/Palestine, they have a variety of influences from all over. And, it is a work written in multiple languages. There's the ancient Hebrew, there's the Assyrian, and there's the Greek. So 3 different languages it was originally written in. But we have this collection of books. And so I want to kind of, with them being gone at a funeral today, I thought we would look at ancient Hebrew poetry, specifically Psalm 23, which we often associate with funerals. So I want to kind of take a look at larger picture and then kind of compare it a little bit to what we think about as far as American literature goes, kind of draw a couple parallels, brief, but then dive into the Psalm 23 part of it towards the end. We can specifically look at a Hebrew poem. So what do we know about American literature? First, there are a lot of different genres. Anybody have a favorite genre? Some of us like mysteries, some of us like poetries, some of us like narrative. So we have a lot of different genres. Horror, like I said, mystery. So they're kind of the same with the Bible. Even though it's like one book, it's more of an anthology of books, and there are different genres in there, which, if we know a little bit about the genres, they can help us understand. We don't necessarily read William Shakespeare the same way we read Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and the Sherlock Holmes mysteries. We don't read Sherlock Holmes the same way we would read Roses Are Red, Violets Are Blue, Sugar is Sweet, and So Are You. Some of them are a little bit more serious. Some of them are a little bit more fun. And then, if you were to take a deeper dive into American literature, you know that there's different time periods, different themes, different things that are important to us. If you were to read something around like Civil War time, for example, there might be a different theme in the literature than there would be today, and some of that creativity. So those ideas of genres and time periods are very much the same in the Bible. Not that you can see this list great, but it's broken into different genres. You have some of the law or the rules. You got books that focus more on history, narrative. You got books that focus more on prophecy or forthtelling. Some of that's more political commentary. You got different letters written by people. You got different poetry and songs written by people. So there's a wide array of different genres that we can read a little bit differently or understand a little bit differently. And similarly, we have different time periods with the Bible. Some of those are written before there's a centralized government. Some of them are written during more of a prosperity age. Some of them are written while the people are in exile, where Babylon or Assyria came in and just ravished the land and took over the government. And like Daniel in the lion's den, where they got plopped away, moved across to Iran and Babylon area, and then had to live over there. So there's a lot of different time periods that are going on. So those are probably the broadest concepts to understand when reading the Bible. That, there's different time periods, there's different genres, just like we encounter when we read American literature. So with me so far? Yep, the one English major is very much nodding the head. So, anybody else major in English, literature, anything like that? But, so if, side tangent, if you haven't noticed, for those of you that have seen a couple sermons now, I've kind of developed into college freshman lecture kind of personality, which is a little bit different than Dan. So thanks for listening. But now I want to dive a little bit into poetry. So when's the last time anybody's read poetry around here? Yesterday? Yep. Good. So when we read different poetry, if you remember back to school, we have different types. Acrostic poetry, where you maybe write a word this way and then develop the line. So maybe it'll spell pen going down, and then across you start a sentence with P, then you start a sentence with E, then you start a sentence with N. Very simple. A lot of elementary kids learn that way. You often have rhyming poetry, the something must rhyme. Often what we think about here in American literature, poetry, it should rhyme, it should sound pretty. Another form of American literature, free verse, where it's just you kind of put your thoughts down. You don't really worry about the rules. How American, right? Let's just make our own way. Let's just do it. But then we also kind of borrow from the places where we came and from others. So We borrow from Japan, where we do haiku poetry, which is what, 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllables. And, when we do that, the point is very much can we do a concise thought? So if we think about the Japanese poetry and where that came from, in America, maybe we were focusing on free verse where we can get our thoughts out with no rules. But when we talk about haiku, where it comes from Japan, it was very much of can you do a concise, concrete thought that can be descriptive and artistic? And then we think a little bit about our European roots, limericks, for example. I once knew a man from St. Ives who, and go on from there. We all enjoy a good limerick, should be funny, should kind of rhyme, make a fun point, tell a story, humor us. Then we think about the English sonnets, and where they came from. And there again, they follow rules. They kind of have a concise, there should be some rhyming, there should be some repeating, but they should tell like a love or an interest or some sort of, some sort of theme that way. We have these different kind of poems. When we read the different kind of poems, we can understand that they're kind of communicating different. One communicates in a funny way. One tries to develop a concise idea in a short amount of sentences. One might do like a word art. One might just allow yourself to express yourself without rules. So then we come to Hebrew poetry and the Bible. And, we have at least 5 books of it with Ecclesiastes, Psalms, Proverbs, and Job, and Song of Solomon. Yep. And they kind of all come, with a certain background. They don't rhyme, so how do we read them? The main idea, and not that those 5 books are the only places where poetry happens. If we go to like Exodus, there's the Song of Miriam. If we go to other books, there's poetry too. But if we look at just the books, and if we had to categorize a book a certain way, those are the 5 books we'd say are more of the poetry style. So not that poetry doesn't exist elsewhere in the Bible, but those 5 books are specifically, they would be in the library, the poetry section of the library, so to speak. So the main idea of Hebrew poetry is parallelism. And it's the idea of they want to develop a thought deeper, but from different perspectives. So it doesn't rhyme. It doesn't necessarily, have that AA, BB, AA kind of format where you go back to things, but it's taking an idea, making a statement, then making the statement from a different point of view, and then developing that idea deeper and deeper. And they do this with some fun ways. They do have a form of acrostic parallelism, whereas if you look at Psalm 119, they take their first letter, their alphabet, they do 8 lines, all starting with that same letter, and repeating some of the same ideas. Then they go on to their second letter, and they do 8 lines, and they work their way through. Hence why Psalm 119 is so long, because it's the equivalent of 8 lines of A, 8 lines of B, 8 lines of C. So they do have some fun with it at times, but not always. A lot of the verses are like synonymous parallelism. I should have said that better. I've said it in my mind all week. But it's the idea of repeating something. So I'll read you a verse as an example. So synonymous parallelism. So the Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is my strength and my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? So Psalm 27:3. So he's taken this idea, the Lord is my light and my salvation, and then he's kind of building on that sentence, whom shall I fear? If the Lord's my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear? But then he repeats it, the Lord is my strength and my life, of whom shall I be afraid? So each sentence is kind of tied in that same structure, and then the two sentences kind of repeat each other with different phrasing or different words. So it's kind of developing the idea deeper, but person A says it in their way, person B says it in their way, and they repeat it. So the next kind of poetry is that antithetical poetry, or opposites, where they take that same repeating idea, but they contrast it. So you often see this in Proverbs. Whoever trusts in his own mind is a fool, but he who trusts in God will be delivered. So you take this idea of trust yourself, you're a fool, trust God, you'll be delivered. So developing the idea, but developing it with person A saying one thing, person B saying the opposite. And they play around with numbers a little bit too in that same kind of parallelism. So if one can be overpowered, two can resist, and a cord of three cannot easily be broken. So they're kind of repeating the same concept, but playing around with numbers a little bit. So probably the most basic principle of when we read Hebrew poetry, when we read the Bible, is kind of thinking about that parallelism. How are the things compared? Take person's A perspective, take person's B perspective, and then kind of think about what are they trying to develop? What kind of thought are they trying to develop? And, as you read different passages, if you can go farther with it, like whole passages expanding, or maybe one chapter saying an idea and then another chapter saying another idea. So you can really kind of think about the larger context. But with that being said, I just kind of want to focus us a little bit on what does that mean when we actually read it? When we take a verse like Psalm 23, or a chapter like Psalm 23, and explore it. So we have this idea, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. So basic premise, the Lord is my shepherd, and then it expands on the idea, I shall not want. He's taking care of me. Then we go on to the next sentence. He makes me lay down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. So that sentence in itself is kind of a repeat, or those sentences are kind of a repeat. So green pastures, still waters. Then it kind of goes back to that first concept of the Lord's my shepherd, I shall not want. Why shall we not want? Well, he's providing us green pastures. He's giving us still waters. So then it develops the idea from another perspective a little bit deeper. He restores my soul. How has he restored my soul? Well, green pastures, still waters, him being the shepherd and providing for me. He leads me on paths of righteousness for his name's sake. So, he's my shepherd, he's leading me, he's providing for me, all kind of within that same theme. However, here's the little catch that we may or may not really think about. Because the next verse is, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for he is with me. So we often say that at funerals, but I don't know if we really think about the impact, because it's developing on the ideas, and it's saying, he walks me through the valley of the shadow of death. But if we think about it, Where is the valley of the shadow of death? The paths he leads me on. So if we follow the Hebrew poetry, he's specifically leading his paths of righteousness are coming through the valley of the shadow of death. They're coming through the scary place where I'm surrounded by my enemies. I don't know how much we often really stop and think about that, of God leading us into the troubled places, God leading us through the troubled places. But then as we go on, it says, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Where's the table he prepared? Well, it's going back to that idea of still waters, green pastures, but valley of the shadow of death surrounded by my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Same idea repeated. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. So it's taking the idea, rephrasing it with different words from a different perspective. But when we think about that, it stands out a little bit more of like, where is the table he prepared for me? Where is the green pastures? Where is the still waters? It's in the middle of the valley of the shadow of death. It's surrounded by my enemies. These are the places where, God is. And, as we come upon this Easter season, it reminds me of old Pastor Dan and one of his Easter sermon series where he talked about I am and the idea that God's name being I am, and the idea that, what does that mean? Well, I am here, I am with you, I am present with you, I'm going through this with you. And I see that kind of, and even though that was the Exodus story, I kind of see that here too of, we here on earth are in the midst of the valley of the shadow of death. We are surrounded by, my enemies, but even in the middle of all that turmoil, all that scariness, this whole thing is saying, I prepared a table before you. I'm taking care of you. I'm here with you. I am anointing your head with oil. I am surrounding you, safeguarding you. And it's just building and repeating. But, that might be the difference between knowing about parallelism might be the difference between how you kind of interpreted that. Before I knew about parallelism, I kind of just thought much more of, that's a nice verse, God's with you. But once you know about the idea of how to read it a little bit better, you can see, yes, God is with you, but also know that God is specifically taking you on some scary, dark paths, but we don't have to be scared by those scary, dark paths because he's leading us there. It's his path. He has the green pastures. He has the still waters. He's, it's only scary to us. It's not scary to him. And I think knowing some of that and can very much help us. And if we think about it a little bit more in the larger context of when Psalms was written, Psalms is a collection of a collection of poetry works. This particular one is attributed to David, but Psalms is actually a collection of like 5 books. And it was collected and kind of curated at a time after the temple was destroyed and some of the people were in exile over in Babylon. So they're specifically, as a culture, grappling with the idea of how do we worship, and Psalms is kind of like a collection of books made so somebody could worship at home, so to speak, without a temple or without a centralized church, quote unquote. And with that being said, culturally they're going through some scary, dark times. They're going through oh my gosh, God is supposed to be here in this temple in Jerusalem, but the temple was destroyed. What does that mean about our God? What does that mean? And, So they're specifically grappling with some of that. And yeah. So hopefully over the next few weeks, I know that was kind of just a brief high school / freshman year of college kind of lesson about poetry and literature and how to read some of the Bible literature. But and maybe in future, if I fill in again, I'll touch on different genres. But in the meantime, go home, read some Proverbs, read some poetry, think about the parallelism, think about how it's developing the one idea through the verse or through the passage, and how it's kind of repeating. And what does that mean if some of it's repeating? What does that mean if, what does it mean for you if he's restoring your soul, but during the restoring your soul, he's leading you on paths, he's taking you through the shadow of the valley of death, he's taking you through the parts where you're surrounded by evil, but ultimately, goodness and mercy will follow us. And, think about some of the times of when have you been surrounded by evil or pressure or devastation or loss, and what does that mean if God is there through us or with us? So, let me know if you have any questions after the fact. I know that's kind of brief, concise, a little bit more of a maybe informational college or high school lecture, but appreciate you all listening, and hopefully the next time you read the Bible, you can think about how it was written and be a little bit more informed about it. So, thank you much. With that being said, let's say a quick prayer, and we'll sing a song. Jesus, just be with us as we go this week, and help us to read the Scripture and to be a little bit more informed about that, to develop a little bit deeper sense of understanding about you. Help us to get some of the concepts that are in the Bible a little bit better this week as we read in our own personal time. Thank you much. Amen.
Redemption's here, your blood We hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Belgrade Online. If it was life-giving and encouraging to you, please let us know by visiting our giving page at baumc.org/give. Thanks again for watching and have a blessed week.